Welcome back to the How to Write for a Living podcast with me, David McElroy. Today's episode is only number 2, and it's very special because we have our first ever guest on the podcast. Today I'm bringing on Veronica of the Lemon Tree Mindset, who I'm sure you'll have seen absolutely killing it on Substack. Veronica's going to talk about Substack and about her writing career to date and about her books to date and just about her general life, and just share some really amazing advice about how to monetize yourself as a writer, about how to grow an audience, about how to connect with an audience in a real tangible way. I really enjoyed this conversation and I think you will too. So here it is, my first ever guest conversation on my podcast with Veronica of the Lemon Tree Mindset. So yeah, Veronica, it's great to have you here today. I really appreciate your time. As I was saying to you just before we started this recording, I've seen you on Substack for a while now and haven't really had the chance to actually meet you properly. So this is really cool. You're technically my first ever podcast guest, so it's really cool to have you on.
Thank you. I'm so excited. I didn't know that I was going to be the first guest, so I'm very, very flattered, and I feel that there's a bit of a responsibility here.
Not at all, not at all. It's great to have you here. I really appreciate it. Obviously you've written guest posts for me for my Substack, and I've written one for you. So it's nice to actually get the chance to chat to you like this. It's a bit different. But Veronica, as we start, just tell me a little bit about yourself. So like your background, like where you're from, what you're currently doing right now. We'll talk about this in more detail as we go on, but if you could just sort of introduce yourself to our listeners and our watchers.
Okay, fantastic. So I like to call myself a citizen of the world. And the reason why is because I've lived in 9 countries. So since I was 5 years old with my family, we had to move countries because of my dad's job. So I'm originally from Spain, from the Canary Islands, which is where I am right now. But I've lived in France, in Brazil, in the Netherlands, in Italy. And actually started my career in China. So I moved to Taiwan in the early 2000s. Then I moved to China. And now I live in Hong Kong, which is actually where I'm based, where I married my now husband and where our 2 daughters were born. So that's a little bit about myself and why I call myself a citizen of the world and why I love so much traveling and languages and everything that has to do with all of that. But of course, you want to know also about my writing journey. And the thing is, I didn't start writing until I was 41. So
Mm.
I think there's a message in there that is never too late. You're never too old. And before I actually started my journey as a writer, as a solopreneur, I was a hardcore businesswoman in the corporate ladder, climbing the ladder. I worked for big companies, Apple, Estee Lauder. I had a big job, big title, all these things in Asia mostly. And then I realized during the pandemic that none of that really fulfilled me, that none of that really mattered, that I was maybe climbing the wrong ladder. And I think, just like for many people, the period during COVID was a big moment of reflection and to think about what really matters to you, what makes you happy. And, when you look at the mirror at the end of the day, what do you see? And for me, that was like a big transformational moment. And I decided back then that I was going to do something really different. Just to give a little bit of context, during that period of pandemic and all of that, I was locked abroad of my country. And so I ended up living in Australia, which is the ninth country that I did not mention before. And I wasn't able to find a job. I was looking for jobs. I had a lot of rejection. And for me, that was the moment. That was the moment when I realized that I had everything in me to be successful. If people didn't see the value in me, then I had to find a different place or build that place myself. And that's when I started writing. That's when I started becoming a public speaker. And it was all very organic. I didn't have a master plan. But what I did have was a dream and the passion for communicating and for helping people. And I let all of that evolve into what it is today.
Awesome, that's incredible. And even just even just listening to you now, it's so obvious that you're a gifted public speaker. Like you're just able to explain that so eloquently. So that's incredible. Like you've been all over the world and you've traveled so extensively. And what was it like going from being, as you say, like someone who climbed the corporate ladder and was involved in that world to the kind of world you're in now? Like how does that feel differently to you as a person?
It feels very different in many different ways. I think First, when you're working for someone else, you don't get the same level of fulfillment. And what I mean by this is $100 or $10,000 in the corporate world is one thing. A tenth of that when you're a solopreneur actually feels much better. And to be very transparent, I do earn much less now than I did in the corporate world, but I love what I do. I'm just spending now 2 months of the year with my daughters in Spain with my family. I have the freedom to write and do public speaking from wherever I want. So I think having that fulfillment is one thing. Having that freedom, I used to really struggle to get 10 days off, and I really had to be aligned with the business and check with my boss and all of that. And now my two little bosses are my daughters. I have to make sure that they're okay, they're on board with what we're gonna do. So that's one thing. The other thing is it's quite intimidating, and it's a bit scary, to be honest, not knowing how much you're going to make at the end of the month, not knowing if next month you're going to be doing better or you're going to be doing worse. So not having that predictability is something that is very scary, but at the same time, it gives you so much ownership. It's like, this is my boat, and I better make sure that the boat moves. So I think that's also very scary, empowering at the same time. So I would say that these are the main things, like that feeling of fulfillment, the freedom, and the ownership that comes also with the responsibility.
Yeah, no, I'm totally on board with that. I've been the same. Like I've worked for other people over the years, probably not climbing the corporate ladder, but certainly not being my own boss. But since 2018, I have been, and the difference is incredible, just in terms of how you can live your life and make your own decisions, and nobody's gonna dampen down your creativity. If you want to go for something, you can just do it. And as you say, the rewards financially aren't as big sometimes, but they mean so much more. Especially whenever you've achieved them yourself. So I totally get where you're coming from with all that. I'm definitely on board with that. Um, and Veronica, you mentioned recently about, I think in one of your pieces, about how you're quite introverted, but you're also a public speaker. So how does that work? Like I'm also in a position where I can kind of turn on the extroversion whenever I need to, but I'm very, very much an introvert as well. So what's it like for you if you have to get up on a stage or in front of a screen or something like that and speak to one person or an entire crowd of people? How do you get yourself into that mode? How do you click into that?
Yeah, so actually, to give more context on that, yesterday, for example, I delivered a session on cultural agility for the UK government. So that
Wow.
was a huge thing for me.
Mm,
And so I did have to do a lot of work on the mindset to be ready. I know that a lot of writers are introverts. I think we do find our voice through writing. It's very comfortable. We don't need that stage and all of that. But what I realized, especially in my corporate career, is that I was really missing out by not by being an introvert, but by not putting myself out there like most extroverts would do.
mm,
And I felt that that was not fair, that I also had the skills, I also had the knowledge, the experience, and the voice. And it wasn't heard because I wasn't putting myself out there. So I think the first thing is convincing yourself that you have a voice that and a story to share that is worth sharing.
mm,
Problem is, as introverts, we prefer to stay behind the screen and write, and it feels very, very comfortable. And so the first thing was to really convince myself, okay, I have to put myself out there. And then I don't know if this can help other introverts, but what I realized is that speaking in public is actually not that different from writing, in the sense that it's a different channel. It's really not that different. The same way that I'm writing and I'm sharing an idea and I'm expressing it with the world, I can do the same using a different channel. And I think as a writer, it's so powerful when you're able to use different channels like you're doing now, David. So you're just starting your podcast. So now you have one more avenue, you have one more channel of sending those same messages. So I really tell myself on how important it is, and how effective it is to have one more platform. The other thing also is that I have to say that I find it easier to speak in public to 100 people than being in a room full of extroverts, sorry, where I'm trying to fight and I'm getting interrupted. And I actually find that hard. And that's what I have the most challenge with. In terms of speaking in public, I do think that if you do know your message, if you're prepared, if you're confident and you've done your mindset work, is actually not that hard.
Yeah, I get that as well. Yeah, uh, I think because I spend so much time on my own, working by myself from home, I get almost uncomfortable if I go into big crowd situations now, and I almost forgotten what that's like. And it definitely is easier if you're standing up on a stage or something like that with a prepared statement to deliver. And I totally get that, but it's incredible what you've been able to do. Like that's the fact that you're speaking to the UK government, and you know, did you ever think you would get to that point? Was that like a goal for you to kind of get to that stage as a speaker, or?
No, it's something that really evolved. And to be honest, my journey as a solopreneur started in 2022. So it's around 2 years now, almost 2 years.
Mm,
And I just started with one post on LinkedIn. I had no idea what I was doing, but I thought, well, recruiters are rejecting me. No one is seeing my value. What can I do? I'm in this country where I'm a foreigner. I obviously have an accent, but I also have a story that I want to share. And so I just started creating content on LinkedIn. So that was my first touch point with the digital world. And then from there, I realized that I had more to say than just like this shorter type of content that you usually get on platforms like LinkedIn or X or things like that. And I started writing on Medium. And so my point here is that you can start with something small and you don't have to have like this massive strategy and this perfect business plan, because that is going to be a stopper very often, because you're
mm,
waiting to have the perfect strategy and the perfect vision and the perfect pillars and people obsess over niche. I didn't do any of that. I just let things evolve organically. And one of the things that I did is always pushing myself out of my comfort zone. 2 years ago, I did my first podcast. I was terrified before my first podcast. And the host, and by the way, this is something that you could tell also your guest, she told me, Veronica, it doesn't have to be perfect. And that was such a reassuring statement as someone who was speaking on a podcast for the very first time. Today is maybe my 70th or 80th podcast. I don't know. But what I do know is that 2 years ago, I did my first one. I'm saying this because I went from writing to speaking in my first podcast. And that experience actually let me know that I could get better at speaking in public, that I could actually leverage my experience and my skills and my work as a leader. I had done a lot of public speaking too, even if it wasn't formally a public speaker. And so that's how I started to evolve the podcast, from starting to do pro bono work. Then I started to offer public speaking webinars, workshops, both in live and person, live and online.
mm.
And now it got to the point where I've done public speaking for the EU, for example, in Hong Kong. Yesterday, I did it for the UK. So that was the long answer. The short answer is no. I never thought that that was going to be possible, but I also don't say that anything is impossible. So if you told me today, do you think that one day you'll be doing a TEDx? I'll say, yes, maybe one day. Why not? And I think that's the mindset.
Yeah, I love that. And you could definitely do a TEDx talk. There'll be no problem to you whatsoever. That's incredible, Veronica. I love that. Yeah, I just love hearing that you didn't necessarily set out to do that, but that just kind of happened organically because you pushed yourself to keep taking those steps, which is incredible. I love that. And you mentioned about LinkedIn, and things like that. And I just want to, there's something that was in one of your recent articles. I think it's maybe your pinned article on your Substack, which is kind of about your journey. I'm just going to quote this. You said, I become a writer, self-published 2 books, launched my memoir with a publisher, launched 3 ebooks, become a public speaker, launched this newsletter, and built an audience of 15,000 people across Medium, LinkedIn, and Substack. And obviously you've already mentioned some of that, but I mean, for one thing, that's incredible having an audience that size, and I know you've added more to that since then. I think that article was back in January maybe, and you've had other exciting news happening since then. Um, but in terms of your writing, in terms of building an audience, how did you do that? What kind of advice would you give to people who are trying to create an online audience for their books? And we'll talk about your books in a second, but first of all, your audience, how did you manage to make that happen?
Sure. So I think when you're building an audience, the key thing that I wish I had known at the very beginning is that your biggest asset is going to be your email list.
Yep.
That's one thing. The reason why is like if you have friends, you have, for example, LinkedIn, I have over 7,000 connections, right? But I don't have an email list there. So how deep can that relationship really go? I don't control when those people see my stuff. I don't control if I send something, I don't know who is going to see it. And so even if you have 100,000, it remains at a very superficial level. When you have a newsletter, even if it's small, you really start to build a much more intimate relationship with your audience, with your readers, with your followers. It takes a different level because you're controlling the journey. And so they're kind of growing with you. So I think, technically speaking, understanding the difference between followers and subscribers is something that's really, really huge.
Mm.
And in terms of how to grow it, I think one of the things that's really important is to have a vision of what you're trying to do. And what I mean by this is a lot of people, they're obsessed with the word niche. You have to have a niche, you have to have a digital marketing content creator or whatever it is. And if you have that niche already, it's great. And a lot of people are very successful with that. But ultimately, what I think you should ask yourself, and what I ask myself is, how can I help someone who is reading my audience, who is reading my newsletter? How can I help that person? Why would that person want to read what I write? Why would they want to listen to me? And I think that helps you as a North Star,
Mm.
because very often we as writers, we tend to be very centered on ourselves. I write for myself and I feel like talking about this topic or this different topic. When we change that shift and we really focus on the person who is at the end of that email, who has like a packed inbox and they're going to receive one email, what is the reason for them to follow you? And I
Mm.
think giving people a clear reason to follow you is something that is very, very effective.
Mm. Yeah, amazing. I love that. And I've heard that kind of advice from other people who are also doing the same kind of thing you are and creating a really engaged, tangible connection with their audience. How do you how do you actually write for your audience? I know it sounds like a silly question, but how do you go about shifting from writing about the things you want to write about and writing from your own perspective to writing the kind of things that are going to be specifically for them? What does that process look like for you?
Everyone has a different process, but what works for me, and this is not only when I write, is also when I do public speaking. I always ask myself two questions. The first one is, how do I want people to feel? Because humans are all about feelings. So how do I want people to feel at the end of my newsletter, at the end of my keynote? The answer for me is very often I want them to feel inspired,
Mm.
like, yes, I can do this. And I want them to feel empowered. Yes, I will do this. So that's in terms of the feeling. The second thing is, what's the takeaway? The reason also is because I'm a self-improvement author. So a lot of what I do is about motivational work, is about mindset. So that wouldn't necessarily work for a fiction author, for example. But when I think about actionable takeaways, then that means that I'm trying to convert and translate my content into something that someone can take and say, oh, yes, I feel inspired by this. I can do it as well. I'm going to do it.
Mm.
To give you an example, if I'm writing about publishing a book, I don't just write about publishing from my perspective. I also think on, what would someone who has never published be thinking? What questions, what fears would they have? And so doing this, changing your point of view and looking at the perspective, at a different perspective from the angle of your readers, is something that's very difficult, but is very helpful because you're able to have a more 360-degree view on your work.
Yeah, perfect. And yeah, I think that's kind of one of the biggest challenges I think for writers who are offering advice to the readers is how to get into their way of thinking and not just write for themselves, but how do you write for your audience in a way that's really going to benefit them, that's going to put them first in the conversation, that's going to make everything about them in the best possible way. So if you're able to do that as you've done, then that's a real asset, I think, as a writer. And speaking of writing, I obviously want to talk about your books. So I mentioned them briefly before, but tell me a little bit about the books you've written so far, and tell me about your most recent bit of really exciting news, which I think happened this year. to do with a publisher.
Okay, cool. So let's go back 2 years in the past. And my first book was a self-published book called The Lemon Tree Mindset. Full disclosure, it was self-published because no one wanted to publish it. So that was a good thing because I had to teach myself how to publish. So I did publish it on Amazon. And what I did with that book is after I went through this reinvention that I mentioned at the beginning, going from the corporate world to starting writing, going from a big title to really having no brand and starting from zero, I realized that I had a story to tell that could, as I was saying before, inspire other people, give them a little bit of a framework. And so in that book, I decided to share the 19 lessons that helped me start with that journey. You have no idea how many people who are in the corporate world with big jobs, they ask me, how did you do it? I would love to do something, but I don't know where to get started. I feel that I'm caught in this golden cage. So I knew that there was an opportunity and that people need to hear that it's possible, but they also need to hear how you can do it. And so I share these 19 lessons, and a lot of it was things about the mindset. I start with this message that I really believe in: 1 in 8 billion. That's how special you are. Because a lot of people, writers and non-writers, they think that their story is not special. They think that they're not that great at, they think that they're not an expert. And we have to change that narrative. It's not about being an expert. It's about really looking at yourself and seeing, how you can convert all of your diversity, like all of that makes you you. There's a lot of value in that,
Mm.
and how you can share that with other people. So that was one of the messages. But the idea is really to give people a framework so that if they want to start something, especially if it's writing online or if they want to be a public speaker, they can follow certain steps. The reason why it was called the lemon tree mindset is because, as you know, in English, we say when life gives you lemons, you should make lemonade. But I changed that to when life gives you lemons, you shouldn't just make lemonades. You should use the seeds to plant your own lemon tree, which
Okay.
was really what I was going through at the moment. I felt that I had a lot of lemons with being out of my country, locked abroad, hadn't seen my husband in months. I wasn't able to find a job. And then in the end, I was like, well, I have all these lemons, right? So I might as well make something epic with them.
And you mentioned, you used a phrase there in the midst of that, which I love. I think you said, being trapped in a golden cage. Of people in the corporate world, I never heard that before, but that's really, I love that. Um, and yeah, I can imagine there'd be so many people in the corporate world who do feel that way. And you presented this book, which can show them how to step out of that, or possibly start to step out of that and think in a different way, which is amazing. And tell me uh about your book deal that you've got now as well. So you mentioned this recently, and I'll let you tell our readers and listeners about that.
Yeah, so I have a lot of people ask me about my new book, which is coming out in January next year. And the book is called The Anti-Procrastinator.
Mm,
And what's special about this book, besides the book itself, is that it's my first time with a major publisher. So it's been published by Penguin Random House, which is one of the top big publishers in the world. I think it's probably number one.
mm,
And so where do I start from here? I think a lot of people want to know how I was able to get the deal. So maybe we can start there. And the first thing, I wrote an article on these about these on Medium, and I said that there was the sexy story and the unsexy story. And so the sexy stories that I pitched to the publisher, I had like this great idea. There was a special angle. They liked it, and they even actually sent me an offer before I wrote the book. So
wow.
that's a pretty sexy story, and everyone's like, "Oh wow, that's amazing." Now, on to the unsexy story. The unsexy story is that I've been writing for 2 years. I've got so many rejections from publishers, and every time I receive one of these rejections, it was also an opportunity for me to try harder and to say, "Well, I'm gonna see how I can do a better pitch." And I'm going to see how I can be a better writer. I also hired a coach, an Australian bestseller author,
Mm,
to work together for 6 months for my memoir. And so, yes, it got to the point of that sexy story. But my big message is that together there were 2 years of very unsexy story with a lot of, hard work in the dirt. And so that's really the full story, right? The 360. In terms of the book, is really about beating procrastination. I think everyone suffers from procrastination at some point, whether it's something that intimidates you or something that you feel that is really boring or something that you're just not familiar with. We could all work on our mindset to be able to achieve more and tackle those things, tackle the eat that frog. There's a book that's called Eat That Frog. For me, it's very often the accounting and all the admin stuff that I always postpone and postpone and postpone.
Mm.
And so the idea of the book is really to, with self-awareness, beat procrastination. I don't say in the book, I don't tell anyone you should do this or wake up at 5 a.m. or do something 1,000 times. I don't believe in those things. I believe that you should be self-aware and know what are your triggers and what are the things that really motivate you, what are the things that scare you. So really understanding your self-awareness from a 360. And what I mean by this is emotionally. Also, who are the people that bring you up? Who are the people that act as anchors? And by understanding yourself better, then you're able to be in charge and you're able to be proactive and beat procrastination before it even shows. So that's in a nutshell the idea of the book.
Amazing. I'm definitely gonna get that when it comes out.
I don't think you need it.
No, I don't know. I'm a huge procrastinator, and that's usually about all the things you've talked about there, about admin and things like that. So, yeah, I think I need more self-awareness. And that comes out in January, did you say? Yeah,
Yeah.
January. Okay, cool. I'll definitely look out for that. Um, Amazing. So Veronica, you're doing amazingly well. I love your publication. I've been a subscriber to it for a while on Substack. I think the content you put out is class, as I would say here in Northern Ireland, it's class. And tell me a little bit more about it. So, why did you decide to join Substack, and what is like a real key lesson you've learned in the time you've been on it so far?
Mm. So why I started on Substack, the first thing it was that I wanted to start building my email list. As I was saying at the very beginning, I realized after a few months of being online that I was relying on an algorithm and I knew nothing about that algorithm. That algorithm seemed to know everything about me. So I didn't feel that it was very balanced. And I said, okay, I need to be in control. The tactical reason why I launched my newsletter, and that was in February last year, 2023, was because I launched my book, The Lemon Tree Mindset, and nothing happened. I
Mm,
wasn't selling a lot of books. I didn't really know how to promote it. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be a great idea if I was able to send one chapter every week to my subscribers? And I just had a few dozen or so when I started. And so that's how I started my newsletter. It wasn't very strategic, but it was very tactical. I wanted to support the launch of my book. And that's why my Substack is called The Lemon Tree Mindset, because in my mind, it was just something that was going to support my book. Then what happened is the book had 19 lessons, and every week I was sending one lesson. And after 19 weeks, I realized, oh my God, I have these subscribers, but I don't have any content anymore. I have to do something about it. And so I decided, okay, this is it. You're going to keep the elementary mindset going beyond the book. So
mm,
that's quite interesting because what started as a book then became a newsletter. And then it really became my philosophy, let's say my brand. A lot of people associate me with lemons and lemonades. I get a lot of that in the digital world. And so that's how I started. It was really more of a tactical move.
mm,
In terms of the biggest lesson is that nothing happens overnight. Like people love to hear an overnight success story. And I believe in overnight success stories, many, many nights.
mhm,
I say this because for the first year, I didn't have a lot of traction. I wasn't flat, but I was just growing very marginally. I had maybe one subscriber, two subscribers a day. Sometimes I didn't have any. Some days people unsubscribed, so I started to shrink. And this happened for around 8 months or so. And it got to a point that I like to call the danger zone,
mm,
when there was a month where in terms of stats, and this was around 8 or 9 months after I launched it, I started to go down. And at that point, I was like, oh, this is so demotivating. I've been putting all this effort into this, it's not growing. And I had two options there. I could either quit. I
mm,
really had a second option, which was keep doing the same. But I knew that if you keep doing the same, you're probably going to get similar results, or start thinking differently.
Mm.
And that's when I really changed my mindset. And I think you've talked about this before as well. I realized that I didn't really have a strategy. And I wanted my Substack to be like a business. I wanted it to be monetized. I wanted it to grow, but I was not thinking like an entrepreneur.
Mm.
And there was a gap there. And I think it's totally fine for people who just want to ride and they want to take it as a hobby and they don't want to take it to the next level. But it wasn't my case. My case is really to build this ecosystem around writing and public speaking. And I did want to take my newsletter to a more elevated level. And that's
Mm.
when I sat down and I said, okay, I've been in the business world for 15 years. I'm going to apply the things that I know from Apple and from other great companies and put that into practice for my own business.
Mm.
And that's when I started to think as when I was thinking as my newsletter, see it as a startup. So I
Mm.
started to think on what is the vision? What are the pillars that are going to help me cascade that vision? What is the look and feel? How can I make sure that when people see my publication, it feels consistent? Like when you go into an Apple store, it doesn't matter if you're in Japan or if you're in the US, it feels very similar.
Mm.
So I started to really have a much more strategic approach. And I also started to be much more active on Note. Until then, I was just posting every now and then on Note. No one was replying. So it was a little bit like, not, I didn't have a lot of feedback, right? And the part of my strategy was to say, my newsletter is not just a newsletter, it's a community. And a
Mm.
community, it means that it's not just one way information. It has to be in newsletters. It has to be engaging with the community on a daily basis. So I started to be very active on Notes. I started to think outside the box and create new content. For example, I created an email course through Substack for my paid subscribers. So that was again something new. And then more recently, I think this was in May, I launched webinars for my paid subscribers as well. So I took a very different approach from something that was much more organic and it was much more intuitive to something that was much more strategic. It was something that was much more thinking of my audience and based on community versus, oh, I'm going to write a great newsletter and hope that people love it and that I'm going to grow.
Mm.
That could work for others, but it didn't really work for me. So I had to think bigger. And the idea of the community, I think that is something that people really crave. I think community is a buzzword. Every person that I talk to says, oh, my community, my community. But when you dig a little bit deeper, there's not a lot of community. Community means that people are talking not only to you, but you're creating a forum where people can also talk to each other and where people start to have discussions and everyone is adding. And that's a gap there. I don't think that most people have realized what community actually means. And also it means something different for you. It means something different for me. So that's an area that I'm definitely still tapping on and seeing how I can take it further.
Yeah, and you're 100% right about that. I think so many newsletters can start off as sort of information mills and just kind of send information out to their readers, but it's community that makes it stick and makes it grow and makes something organic happen with it. I find that for me, for my publications, the more community aspects I introduce, um, not necessarily the faster it grows, but the deeper it grows. So I can see more conversations happening between subscribers. I can see more engagement happening in a real way underneath my posts and underneath notes and things like that. And I think any really successful online community I've seen is based on community. Like it has that aspect to it where members communicate with each other and it goes horizontally instead of just vertically between you and the subscriber. Um, so yeah, I totally agree with that. I think community is massively key. And I love what you said as well about how you start to think about your Substack in like Apple terms and having that sort of, that feel to it where everything kind of matches the same tone and it's like on brand and that sort of thing. I think that's really important too. And I can see that with yours. Like whenever I go onto your publication, um, it's yellow. You're like lemons and everything matches and the logo's there and you know exactly if I see a note from you coming up on notes, I know exactly before reading it that it's from you because I can see the branding there straight away. And I think maybe that's something people overlook a little bit. Maybe I've overlooked that as well with my publication sometimes. Um, and in terms of notes, I just want to mention that again as well, because notes has been a real game changer for me. Um, what would you say? is the best way to communicate with people on notes? Like, what's the best kind of note to put out? If someone was going to write a note each day just once, what should that note be? Like, what should it be? Like an educational note? Should it be an entertainment kind of note? What would you say worked best for you?
So I'm going to say not only what works for me, but what I see as well. And for the public here, by the way, David is much more successful than me. So I would like to ask you this question when it comes to notes, because I've seen you go viral so many times. And the one thing that I think people love is seeing authenticity. And I don't want to use the buzzword. What I mean is that if you, David, you recently did a trip to Canada, I think, and you posted quite a few pictures about your trip, and you had pictures of it as well. It's very you, and it feels that it's you. The thing is, someone else might do the exact same thing and said, "Oh, but I also went to Canada and I posted my pictures and it didn't work." Well, the thing is, David here has been building this brand and this community for a very long time. And I'm pretty sure that if I was to post one of my notes that I posted last year, maybe this is an experiment, today it would have so many more likes than it did a year ago, because it's not just the note. And I think that's something very important for people to be aware of. I had to talk to the wall so many times, and I posted so many notes that didn't get any engagement. Were the notes bad? Not necessarily, but I didn't have a community. And
Mm,
so when you're saying something, whatever it is, and people already like you and people know you and people support you, chances are they're going to comment. And so I think there's a message in there that is not just about the note that you write, is about the connection, is an ecosystem. Don't take the note outside. If you're just posting notes and disappearing, that's probably not a strategy that is going to be very sustainable. If people are seeing your name in their publications, in their posts, in their own notes, then you're starting to build that community. So that's one thing. In terms of the type of content, I find that on notes, it's less so the informational stuff, because if you want information, you can Google or you can use ChatGPT, and you're probably going to find that there people are looking more for personal stories. For example, if I was to talk about, let's say, the topic of publishing or self-publishing that we've been talking about today, if I said 10 ways to self-publish or whatever, versus saying, this is what worked for me, or this is a mistake that I made with self-publishing, make it yours. I think make it personal, make people feel that this is Veronica's post. It's not something that I could just copy paste, from somewhere else. Like,
mm,
to give you an example, one of the notes that I posted yesterday was a picture of an ocean pool where I went here in the Canary Islands yesterday before having my session, the webinar for the UK government. And it was a note where I said, "Oh, this is how I like to prepare for my webinars or my keynotes. How do you like to prepare?"
mm,
And I had a bunch of people who started commenting, "Oh, that's great. I prefer to do these. I like to do some mindset work." So again, I also try to keep in mind that aspect of community. So this is what I do. How do you do it? And I like to open a forum. But I think this idea of starting with you, and not overcomplicating things, in the sense, I don't think personally that it has to be super strategic, that you have to have a calendar of the week. On Monday, I'm going to post about these. I see a lot of, social media bros telling you, "Oh, you have to have everything, so packed and planned, and, scheduling the calendar." To me, writing is also fun. And I
mm.
don't want to take that element of being a bit spontaneous, and having that freedom of saying, "Well, today I actually feel like talking about someone who unsubscribed, and they said, 'Thank you for your content, but I'm ready to move on.' I really want to share a note about that, because it's what's on my mind right now today, and I probably will do that after our podcast."
Yeah, and for me, some of my most successful notes, the ones that have gone viral, whatever, have been ones I haven't thought about in the slightest. I've just posted it. It's been like an emotional thing. I've just had a feeling that something's happened, whether it's good or bad, and I've stuck it on notes, and it's done really, really well. It's got like thousands of likes and generated hundreds of subscribers for me. And yeah, like I do treat notes in a sometimes I treat it in a sort of strategic way where I try and figure out what is the best way to do this in terms of saving me time. So if I do want to write a note that makes a lot of sense to people and has good value, is there like a model for that? But I totally agree that I think whenever you convey your personality through notes, those are the ones that will most likely garner interest and people will connect with best. Um, Yeah, that's why I share so many pictures of my dogs and things like that because people love dogs, and I love my dogs as well, so other people are gonna like them too. Um,
Yeah.
and for you, Veronica, as well, I just had a question about like time scales. So you said about talking to the wall for quite a lot and nothing was really happening and that sort of thing. When did that change? Like, at what point did you start to see your notes getting more traction and getting more engagement?
I think it wasn't just suddenly it started to pick up. I think it was gradual. I started to have some notes that started to do better, and I realized that what they had in common was exactly what we talked about. They were more the spontaneous notes where there was something more emotional, and whether it was something very positive, like a win, for example, but also the more vulnerable note when I shared how I started to turn those lemons into lemon trees, for example, or things like that. I noticed that people, they relate much more to human struggle and they relate much more to imperfection
Mm,
than actually saying, oh, I just landed a book deal with a top publisher. Okay, great, good for you. But that doesn't really move people. I think what moves people is to know that, yeah, that's great. But to get there, I had to work really hard for 2 years and I had to get a lot of rejections. And I think opening that vulnerability door is what let people in, literally. So
yeah.
I think there was definitely that. And then in terms of being a little bit more tactical, there's another way that I use notes, which is simply to promote my post. A lot
Yeah.
of people, a lot of writers, what they do is they publish their post and they just wait there to see if the post does well or not. And the reality is that when you publish a post, think of it like a book. You publish your book, a mini publication, right? And you have to find ways to promote it. And for me, notes serve that purpose. So I very often very strategically pick parts, small sentences, or maybe just a paragraph of the post, and I restack it with a note
Mm,
because I know that that part resonated with some readers. So it's likely that it's going to resonate with others. So you can also experiment different things. I
mm,
have a post. I don't know if maybe you want to share it together with these podcasts on 18 different ways to use notes. And it was not just mine. I looked around. I think one of them was yours, by the way, on how you can use note to share a win, no matter how big or small. You can use them about your hobbies. I'm a triathlete, so very often I post things related to running and exercise. You have dogs, so maybe you can post pictures about dogs. Like there's so many different ways that you can post notes, and I don't think that you should just lock yourself into one way or one style of doing notes. I think it's about experimenting and trying different things.
yeah. I love that. And yeah, just quickly, you're a triathlete, did you say there? Yeah. Yeah. Have you been enjoying the Olympics right now?
Yes, I watched the women yesterday. I haven't watched the men. I watched the women, loving it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, my wife in particular, she's really into it. She's just been glued to the TV for the last couple of weeks. But yeah, it's been great. Yeah, and sorry, just go back to notes again. Yeah, you're so right. I think experimenting and trying different things and I restack my posts as well. I love the idea as well of taking a line that resonated with people and using that in the restack. I think that's really clever. I really like that. I might try that too. I might steal that after this. One thing I've been doing as well is I have been recently been taking like going back to my older articles, like the ones I published maybe like months ago, and taking like a learning point from that, and then kind of breaking that down in like a mini, almost like a mini post within a note. Just kind of like giving like action points and stuff from that one little action point and from the original post, which I think works quite well too. I've also tried taking like a line that I wrote in a post and putting it into like a graphic. So going on to like Canva, making a nice aesthetically pleasing graphic and then just sharing that because I think that pictures do well in notes a lot of the time. Pictures almost seem to do better than just text sometimes. So I think if my advice for anybody listening or watching would be to use graphics as much as possible and use video sometimes as well. Just kind of mix it up, as Veronica's been saying, and just experiment and try different things and try to cater for everybody in your community who maybe responds to stuff in different ways. Some people like text, some people like images. Just kind of cater to everybody as much as you possibly can. Veronica, I'm just going to ask you one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. Um, and you've already obviously given lots of great advice and things like that. What is if you had to give like one key bit of advice for if people just forgot everything else we talked about here today and they took away one key bit of advice about writing, especially in terms of writing for a living, what would you say that advice would be from your perspective?
I think it would be about zooming out, because in the moment it's very easy to have a bad day, you have a bad month, and you think that you're not a good writer, and you think that this is not going to work, and you think that is a failure. But what you're seeing today is a point in time. And I think when you zoom out, you realize that there's a much bigger picture, and that where you'll be tomorrow or where you are today does not define where you are tomorrow. If I hadn't had this mindset, I would have quit a long time ago. I would have quit Substack. I would have quit writing books. I would have quit being a public speaker, because when you see yourself in that deep, it's easy to say it's always going to be like that. It's never going to change, but things can change. And if you don't know how, get feedback, hire a coach, do things differently. There's this quote from Einstein, very famous quote, that insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting the same results. And so zoom out, look at what you've been doing, look at the results, and see what you can do differently, because today is just a point in time. So that would be my biggest advice.
Amazing. I love that. That's brilliant. I keep repeating the words I love that, I realize in this podcast, but it's just because I love what you're saying. I said it so many times. And yeah, I think that that's so true. Zooming out and just getting a bit of perspective, even where you were a year ago compared to where you are now, and those changes you make going forward don't need to be big changes. They can just be minor tweaks each time. Just keep iterating and iterating until you kind of get things where you want them to be. But Veronica, it's been great to chat to you. Like, I've really enjoyed this conversation. As I said, you've been my first ever podcast guest, so that's pretty cool for both of us, I think. And I love what you said today. And anybody listening and watching, make sure you check out Veronica's Substack publication, first of all, Lemon Tree Mindset. I'll link to it below this wherever I've shared it. And also check out her book coming out in January. And yeah, I'm sure Veronica will keep you posted about that as the time draws near. But Veronica, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. And I will see you on Notes and on Substack really soon.
Thank you, David. It was my pleasure.
Thanks so